Okay, so now we're on. Um, yeah, how do you say your name?
Amarvir,
Uh,
Amarvir. Veer.
uh, Veed is your the way you say it, huh?
Yeah, like VEER, except my mom preferred spelling it as VIR. So,
Okay, Veer then would be
yeah,
the way.
yeah, Amar
Amateur.
V. Yeah,
Okay. Um,
you can just call me Amar.
all right. One of the things that you have said so far is that you've been reading books and getting things out of books. There's um, we can think of a book as kind of a repository of information that's worth looking up. Um, but using a book to follow the guidelines of the book on how to practice generally is problematic. And the reason for that is that the book, when it was written, does not know about the reader who's reading it.
So,
And so every reader is trying to get something out of a book. And the book originally was written by the author about the author, not about. And so one of the problems that I see in the West, and from what you've been telling me about, it seems like that it's in Asia also. And maybe it's just a human condition, and I had kind of thought that it was Western because most of the students are Western. But let's put it in this context. It has to do with if you have an organized system, then the students will feel as if they're making progress while they're moving from one step to the next within a system. And yet, all books have to be organized in a system, or date or information has to be presented in some order or another. And that we get the idea then that the order that things are presented in the book um, is somehow important. First things first, etc., like that. Unfortunately, life does not come that way. Life does not come in an ordered, step by step fashion. Sure, there's things like childhood and adulthood, but most of the adults that I see are still children most of the time. And so um, I want to put a caution out about things that have stages or steps. And possibly one example would be the 16 stages of insight that come out of the Visuddhimagga and that have been associated with the Mahasi system. Um, here's a few points about it. Is that people get the idea that it has to be done from step one up through step 16. But if you look at step 16, do you know what step 16 is?
the fruit.
It's ongoing reflection
Uh,
about what needs to be done.
yeah.
Well, that sounds like the first step. Doesn't sound like the second or the last step. Another one is that the Four Noble Truths are at step 12, and really can't even get started without the Eightfold Noble Path. So we have to practice the Eightfold Noble Path right from the beginning. Another thing that seems to have gotten uh, confused is around step 8 and that area where it's talking about the disillusionment and disgust. Basically, what is really going on for the student who is practicing well is that they become disgusted with the world and the lies that they've been told, disgusted with how people wind up suffering needlessly because they're following a set of rules that were set up by society. And then we get further disgusted that we're caught in it. And we become disgusted with our own bad behavior. But that disgust of the bad behavior is actually part of the determination that it takes to get out of it.
Yeah. Like, I finally just need to get out of this. That's
All right. However, the Western mind has gotten to the point of mixing metaphors and mixing religions and things like that. And so they get the idea, and in the West, they generally talk about it like this as a dark night of the soul. Being really disgusted is the dark night of the soul to them. But that's not actually the case. You see, because the dark night of the soul is more about despair, not disgust. What I mean by despair is that, you see, the dark night of the soul, the whole concept of it is that there's a soul. If there is no soul, then how can the soul have a dark night? Depends upon how you spell night. But the dark night of the soul is actually a Christian concept, and that it came out of the writings of St. John of the Cross way back when. And that in more recent times we have a good example of that would be Mother Teresa, who was in Calcutta for many years. But back to John of the Cross, the whole idea of the despair comes from that basically the statement that Jesus said when he was on the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? You see, within Christianity, unlike Buddhism, they have a God and a Jesus and someone that's going to help you a leg up. The idea that there is help. Okay. Where the second noble truth, and much of what we're really talking about within the context of the Buddhism, is that everyone is in fact responsible for their own behavior. Everyone is responsible for the results of their actions, and everybody is responsible for their actions and feelings and thoughts, etc., like that. So this raises the issue of doubt. And so the dark night of the soul is actually let us say, the bottom of the doubt. When the Christian practitioner has called upon God, prevailed upon God, and done this hours a day, day after day, for year after year, and they do not ever get anything back from God. All right? So they put all of their hope, all of their faith, all of their trust, all their actions, and all of their entire life into trying to make contact with God, and it don't happen. That's despair. Okay, why does God forsake me? Right? The answer is because you're barking up the wrong tree. So that's one of the differences that we have to make sure that we're looking at is that, yes, despair is actually quite a valuable thing to happen. It's what helps us to become supramundane or lokatara. It helps us to get away from the world because we see the world as a disgusting thing. And we want to get away from it. So back to the issue of doubt. This is actually something very valuable for you, and so we'll stop and take a moment of this, and then we'll get into Anapanasati. There are three kinds of doubt. These kinds of doubts are on two levels. One is the basic not knowing and the underlying feelings. that are associated with confusion and things that actually at the lowest level is a source of fear. If you don't know, if things are dark and cloudy and you can't see very well, then we become afraid, like afraid of the dark, literally. And so this other kind of doubt is the surface kind of doubt that gets the mind spinning and ruminating. Am I doing it right? Is this the right thing to do? Am I praying hard enough? Those kinds of thoughts. Okay, so if we understand that there's two levels, there's the underlying source or condition, and then the surface level stuff that gets in the way. Perhaps an example of that, or maybe a silly example, but that when a road is filled with potholes, then that's kind of an underlying condition. But we kind of put up with that underlying condition as we're tooling down the road until we hit a pothole that breaks the car. And now we have an immediate issue to deal with, okay? But the immediate issue is a broken car. But the underlying problem is potholes, okay? So if you can understand it like that, then we can proceed into understanding that the first doubt is, who can I get to fix this mess? Imagine going into your room and the whole place is just torn up. Like things are all over the floor and shelves are pulled down and all kinds of stuff. The first question that we will ask is, who did this? And the basic point is, who can I get to clean up this mess? Well, naturally, when that question is asked in its various 10,000 forms, naturally there's champions writing up saying, I'll fix this mess. Christianity comes up. Islam comes up. This religion, this psychologist, that doctor, everybody will come up saying, I can help you, but you have to do what I tell you to do. You got to follow some rules or do what you're told to do. And then somehow magically your mess can get cleaned up through outside help. All right. That's the first level of doubt. When we recognize that you cannot, in fact, get outside help, then you recognize you've got to do it for yourself. So that brings up the second layer of doubt. First layer of doubt is, who is responsible for this? The answer is me. All right. The second question is, am I up to the task? And this is a great deal of what Anapanasati is really all about, is gaining the confidence, gaining the strength of mind so that you know that you can handle any situation that comes by without help, that you've got the tools that you need. And then the third layer of doubt, as we progress along the path, we come to understand then that the way that the Buddha has taught and the various tools that he has used, all under the umbrella of dukkha, dukkha nirodha, that's all he taught. But you can see immediately that the Four Noble Truths breaks down into suffering and no suffering. There's two parts that are suffering and the cause of suffering, and then there is no suffering and the path to no suffering. That goes down deeper, and in fact, the Eightfold Noble Path and Anapanasati are intricately related. So that to practice Anapanasati, we actually have to begin to practice the path. So after we get finished with the understanding, I know that I can fix this myself, then we also come to understand also that, yes, and now I have the tools that I need to do that. I've got the method, I've got the path. Well, when you've got all three of those things, that's the full eradication of doubt. Okay, so doubt is in fact one of the items, one of the first three items on the list of fetters. It's one of the early things that has to be dealt with. And so Now that we're looking at it from that perspective, one of the things that a lot of students will come to and says, oh, if I read this book, it will help me. And so people get really into some book or another. But in fact, books are not very good at helping because they're in an organized method or an organized way. And people get the idea that basically because of school. Schools are organized teaching places. Retreats are also organized. Why are they organized? Because you have a whole lot of students that you need to teach a whole lot of stuff to. And so rather than having it spotty with various teachers teaching, let us say that the first grade teacher taught arithmetic and the second grade teacher is trying to teach algebra. Well, the second graders are not ready for algebra. They need a whole lot of mathematics in between. So there are these dangers, as well as students thinking, for instance, with TMI, that they're at a particular step or a particular stage. Oh, I'm at step 6 now, whatever step that is. And yet, those who really understand the path can see, yes, I can see where that monk way back in the 3rd century put that step list together in because of his own practice. But modern students using that 10-step program or that 16-step program to mark their progress is problematic. Okay, that there is in fact not much progress other than the very basic skills that are to be developed. So rather than taking it out of the context of the organized method, we need to look at it as a much more natural kind of thing. And so let's begin looking at the Eightfold Noble Path now, right from the very beginning, that it's not a step 12 item. It's a step 0 item or 1 or something like that. We start off with right view, but as we increase our ability to rise above the world, we get a better viewpoint. Imagine that the fingertip is a camera, okay? If the finger is wrapped around the arm, then the finger camera can only see a tiny portion of the arm that is the world that we're attaching to. But if we can bring the hand out for that camera, it can see what's going on much better, a higher perspective, almost as if instead of, an example would be dogs. They keep their nose to the ground because that's where all of the large molecules are that they use for odor. And a dog then, if it's well trained and is the right species, can then follow a trail or follow that odor so that we can see something like chasing a person or whatever like that. Now imagine that right view is more like a drone. It's not stuck to the ground. It's above the ground and it's taking an overall view. And so therefore we can see a whole lot better. This is one's right view, and that it grows and expands out of looking at things selfishly into seeing things altruistically. So this is part of what happens with one's right view, is we no longer are narrow focused or concentrating. That in fact, that's a real issue with the English language and Buddhism, is that much of the original texts that were translated not by dedicated practitioners of the Buddha. It was done by Christians who were just interested in getting this really old, strange Indian literature translated into English. And so the vocabulary they used was the vocabulary that they had already been using due to their Christian background. giving us words that are so inappropriate. One word that's really inappropriate is the word meditation. We are not practicing meditation. There is a use for meditation from time to time. One could even go so far as to say that real meditation is also the invitation for insight. But generally within Christianity, they'll take a subject for meditation, like the Trinity, or the Stations of the Cross, or the Compassion of Mary, or the Rosary, or whatever like that. And they'll take a narrow focus, and then they'll meditate on that. So we're within the reality that we're talking about through Anapanasati. Actually, what we're going to meditate upon is a very, very great big reality.
As in, it's not super tight focus, right?
Right, exactly. Here's another word that is, in fact, wrongly translated. And this causes a lot of confusion for students, and that word is samadhi, being translated into the word concentration. Samadhi does not mean that at all. Samadhi means gathering together the factors. It's very much like a yurt or a Western American Indian teepee, where all the ridgepoles come together at an apex, where they're tied together. That's the point of samadhi, is when you've got all of the poles in their correct position lined up together. Where concentration generally has the quality of taking non-essential ingredients out and getting only the essential ingredients. Like, for instance, frozen orange juice concentrate, taking the water out of it and putting sugar in and freezing it. Okay, so that's concentrate. But the concentrate itself is not really enjoyable. That in fact, to make it samatha, you've got to add the water back into it. That makes it drinkable. And so we have to kind of change our frame of reference around this issue of concentration. And that it can be easily seen in the understanding of the Zen stick. You probably heard enough about Zen to know about a Zen stick, which is probably a 3-foot long piece of bamboo that has a slit in it, and that the Zen master will go around the dojo and hit certain people on the shoulder with it, and the bamboo stick is designed with that slit in it to make a lot of noise. Not designed to hurt, it's designed to wake up. All right. Now, here's the question. Who does the Zen master hit with that stick?
The one who's concentrating hard.
Well, the one who doesn't know he's there. So the one, like someone is just lost in thought, they're not going to know that the Zen master is there. But if they're paying a whole lot of attention to what's going on, then when the Zen master walks up behind him, his posture is going to increase just a little bit. His own knowledge is going to cause just enough body movement for the Zen master to know that this guy knows I'm here. Okay? But if somebody is in fact in deep samadhi, he's going to get whacked.
Yeah.
If they call it deep samadhi in the way of being fully concentrated on something like even the breath, it's possible for someone to be paying so close attention to their breath that they're going to get whacked. So if we can think of it like that, we're talking about then right view or right samadhi is an opening up. It's not a closing down. This is important. This is an important concept to understand, that this is an opening up, not a closing down. In that regard, there are some features of jhana that are useful, valuable, and wholesome when it comes to opening up. But there's also certain aspects of jhana that are closing down that are now no longer useful in the way that we would think that they were. Because, people are like that in the sense of we like numbers. 1 is good, but 2 is better. 3 is even better, and 100 is high, So we have the idea that, well, if jhanas are numbered, then the higher the jhana, the better. But when we understand it from the Buddhist perspective about gathering together the factors that we need, then the factors that we need are actually in the first jhana, not in the higher jhanas. That in fact, after we gather the 5 factors of the first jhana, then we systematically remove them one after another to go into the higher jhanas. But one of the first things that we lose going from first jhana into second jhana is the ability to conceptualize, the ability to think, the ability to see what's going on. And in fact, the second jhana has very little insight available to it. It's just a pleasant abiding. That it's the first jhana that has the qualities that we're looking for, and also these qualities that we're looking for are embedded directly into anapanasati. And so you read this sutta over here, and it's talking about jhana, and it lists off factor 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you go look at anapanasati, and you'll say, wait a minute, there they are. Those same items are there.
So should it be just those 5 factors, or can those 5 factors exist with other stuff going around and it'll still lead to a jhana?
The other things that are going around are normally hindrances that have not been eliminated yet, and so it's really not first jhana, not yet.
Even if you have those 5 things going on?
Well, you can't have those 5 things going on if hindrances are in the background, because the first item on the list of first jhana is seclusion from the hindrances.
Yeah, ekagata, right?
Pardon?
It's called ekagata, like not being hindered, I guess. That's what it means. Ekagata, that's the Pali term.
I can't quite tell. Can you say it slowly?
Yeah, it's EKKAGATA. Ekagata. Ekagata, as in collectedness, not collectedness, like not having those hindrances. That's one of the factors for jhana, right?
No.
Huh?
Let's go over that list, and that the way that it's described is talking about 3 factors in the one sentence would be the piti and sukha that comes through the seclusion from the hindrances. So once the mind has thrown the hindrances out, at that point in time, when the hindrances are removed, it's quite a relief. It's quite nice to be at a state where we can kind of think the thoughts that we want to think, rather than thinking the thoughts that we're used to thinking,
So
that we're in the habit of thinking.
Thoughts about what's happening right now.
Thoughts about happening right now would be thoughts that would be wholesome, and thoughts about what happened last month are not wholesome. They're not useful. They're not valuable. They're hindrances, in fact, and the hindrance in this case is the hindrance of being here in the present moment. So if you're thinking about something that happened a month ago, the mind is in that past place. It's not in the here now. Another thing that I see with Westerners commonly making the mistake of being time-oriented with past and futures and progress, and I'm at stage 4 this year, and last year I was at stage 3, and I'm practicing on step 5 or whatever like this. This is a very much mental state that society brings in the sense of progress. And that we can see how that mistake is made with a student playing the piano. that when he first starts playing the piano, he has no skills developed. But as he continues to practice the piano, the skills develop. But those skills are developed over a period of time. Let us say that the young piano student was practicing a piece for his recital, and that Aunt Susie comes to visit Mom, and so Mom wants Johnny to play the piano for Aunt Susie. And so he's been practicing, and so he plays it, and he actually is able to play that piece perfectly. Now, while both Mom and Aunt Susie think that's an accomplishment or something that he's done now, basically, no, it's something that's been happening as skills have been developed. And so it's the development of the skills that are really going on, not his ability to play that piece. That the playing of the piece is actually the result, the momentary result of the skills that he's been developing. And so this is the way that we're beginning to look at it, is taking it out of making progress into doing what needs to be done in this very moment. So it's a time change reference that many people don't make in the beginning of their meditation, and because of that, they get into expecting things or wanting things to happen rather than being satisfied with what is happening now. They get into a state of wanting things. In that regard, their meditation that they started to do in order to relieve them of suffering is now a new source of suffering.
Yeah, true.
Which is exactly what you were talking about before we turned the video recorder on, is that you're getting yourself into a state of wanting something out of the meditation. And that wanting something out of the meditation is exactly what people are doing to prevent themselves from getting it. Go ahead.
So yeah, that's like extremely true, and that's when I started reading the direct translation of Anapanasati instead of going through that book, because I'm pretty sure that the author didn't mean for the students to strive so hard and like focus on the stages, but somehow our minds like do that, and I was doing the same. So I saw that's a hindrance in itself when I'm more concerned about what stage I am in and what's happening next instead of what's happening right now.
Okay.
With Anapanasati, and I started doing this a few weeks ago, and I dramatically saw the difference that it made in my sits by letting go of what's happening, and instead of that, like having a lot more sati towards like what's happening right now, and which is weird because I'm not concentrating on the breath so much. It's more like instead of thinking of Anapanasati as mindfulness of the breath, I'm using it as sort of an anchor, mindfulness with the breath. That's something that I read somewhere, where I'm more concerned with what's happening right now and the cravings that arise before a thought comes in as well. So like I can sense a tension sort of building, and if I don't like do something about it, that's when a hindrance comes in.
No, that's already a hindrance. It's already there.
Yeah.
The tension, that's a hindrance.
Yeah. So, but I can only see that now that I've sort of stepped back, and I'm not focusing to like try and stick with the breath. And it's mostly just a general awareness of an in breath and an out breath, and also an awareness of what's happening in the mind. Like when a tension comes in, what do I do so that the tension goes away? How does that lead to joyfulness after like 5-10 minutes and so on? So yeah, I can definitely see how what I was previously doing was a wrong way of doing this.
But that's very typical.
Yeah.
The point that you were making actually is in the book. So students have said that, oh, he says all of that, but then later in the book, when people need to remember that, they're not reading the part of the book where it said that. They're reading all about the higher numbers and the stages and things like this.
Yeah.
Okay. So getting back then to the Eightfold Noble Path and one's right view, the next thing, which is really the most important skill that needs to be developed, and therefore the one that we're going to spend a lot of time on developing, is sati. Not samadhi, but sati. Why? Because if we forget, then we're back in hindrance. We have to remember, continuing to, on a moment by moment basis, whenever we can, to remember to come back to the here now. For the very, very beginning student, the breath is the anchor that they're given, because it's hard to pay attention to last month's breath or next year's breath, that it's this breath that we're going to start watching. And then the mind will wander away. That's very naturally. And so the student has the idea, well, it's really important that I hang on to the breath. And so they're hanging on to the breath really tightly, while the mind is still wrapped in hindrances, where the original intention was to bring the mind out of the hindrance to the breath. Okay, and so the students will talk about it in the sense of, yeah, I'm watching the breath all the time, but there's all this background noise or this other stuff is happening, right? Which means that, in fact, that he was in hindrance, and now his practice has gotten to be hindrance, breath, hindrance, breath, hindrance, breath, and he thinks that he's on the breath all the time, where in fact much of the mind time is spent in hindrances. Okay, so this is the first thing that we have to look at is that we have to begin to control the mind so that the mind's contents are not going to be a hindrance to what we're doing, but rather are going to be, let us say, gathering the factors together. And so whenever the mind is wandering away, it can, in fact, wander all the way away from the breath. That happens all the time, even for more advanced students. The mind just wanders away from the breath unless we're making sure that we're paying attention to it, which is normally what people are going to be doing when they're in sitting meditation. But imagine it like this. Imagine that someone is now going to have gotten a very strong, good sitting practice going, and so he's determined that he's going to sit for 3 hours a day. Okay, so he finds that, 3 hours, 1 in the morning, 1 in the noon, and 1 in the evening time or whatever like that. The way that I would look at that is that, that means now that he is using his mind 21 hours a day in hindrance and 3 hours a day not hindrance. Guess which one's going to win?
The one that's not in hindrance.
No, the hindrances are going to continue to win. It doesn't matter if he's only putting a few hours a day in it. That what we need for sati is to continue to remember, or on a regular basis, remember to come out of the hindrance. To keep coming out of the hindrances. Okay, to wake up. Keep waking up. Keep waking up. Because the natural state of the mind is for it to be off in the hindrances. Or another way of looking at it would be off into personality, or off into the old habits of the mind. And all of our old habits of the mind is, in fact, what makes up a personality. And one of the things that people are confused about, they think that I am me, I am this personality, this is just who I am, etc., like that. Well, what the actual teaching of the practice of the Buddha is all about is that you can change that personality. But it's going to be, let us say, it's going to take some effort, some right effort, and some remembrance on a regular basis to keep coming out of it, because we are normally in that level of hindrance. We're normally in that personality. We're normally in the way of feeling, the way that we have been feeling our whole lives. And most people, their whole lives, they don't feel the way they want to feel. They feel the way that they're in the habit of feeling. And so Anapanasati now is going to be changing that method of living slowly, each one at a time as we remember it, to come out of the way that we used to feel and start feeling the way that we want to feel. Now, that's remarkable. That's in fact all there is to it, is making that choice, and that choice is made at sati time. And that choice would be to flip the switch. Am I going to follow my old ways of doing things? Am I going to be the personality that I've developed? Am I going to be all of those old bad feelings? Or am I, in fact, going to make a new choice? And one way of thinking it is, am I going to come out of the karma, the old karma of the past, and come and be here now? Or am I going to come out of the wheel of samsara and come to this present moment instead? Okay. Now, that's not to be done one time, but it's to be done over and over and over again, because the habits of the mind is to be in personality. The habits of the mind is to continue to do things the way that it's always done. So when beginning meditators say, oh, I can watch the breath, but we haven't really dealt with the personality yet. That in fact we start dealing with the personality whenever we can get the mind out of the habits that it's in and start to develop new habits. And so we begin to use the Eightfold Noble Path as the guideline, or the bookmarks, or the skills to be developed. And then Anapanasati is going to be the method or the way that we're going to be developing these skills. So the method is to develop mental skills, and the method would then be through Anapanasati. Here's an example. If you just if your intention was to learn to play the piano, you bought a piano, you went and bought a bunch of books, you actually hired a piano teacher, had your first lesson, and now between the week of the first lesson and the second lesson, the student spends no time on the piano. He spends all of his time in books, or in reading, or in doing math problems, or fighting with his girlfriend, or whatever, but he's not practicing the piano. Do you think he's going to learn to play the piano that way?
Maybe.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we are sitting in meditation just doing hindrances over and over again, are we actually learning much of anything? No, because we already know how to do that. But if we're going to develop a new skill, we have to actually practice that new skill. So if you're going to have a happy life, that means that you've actually got to practice happiness. You can't be miserable sitting in the meditation hall month after month, year after year, hoping that the giant karma machine in the sky is going to waffle in through the air and do some Shaktipat or something on you, and then you feel good. And when does the karma machine come in? Well, maybe it's 3,000, maybe it's 30,000, or maybe it's 100,000 hours of meditation, you see. This is where all those numbers come from. But that's all magical thinking. That really someone can sit down and feel good immediately. We're just not in the habit of doing it. So we begin to practice getting the hindrances out of the mind, in the sense that the hindrances are hindering us from feeling the way that we want to feel and thinking the way that we want to think. That's why they're hindrances, is because they hinder us from what we want to do. So if we can remember then through sati to begin to practice happiness, then the hindrances, if they come, may pull us out of the practice of happiness. But if we continue to come back to happiness over and over, we're beginning to develop a new skill at it. So in that regard, happiness is a skill to be developed. And that the way that we're developing that skill is by feeling relief from being out of the hindrances. And so even though the background noise is there, when we say it like that, that means that the hindrances are still there. We haven't gotten rid of the hindrances, so we're not really in a state yet. So we have to find a way of becoming free from the hindrances. And the way that we do that is by being on guard for them to make sure that they don't come back. And so one's right effort then in the very beginning is to get the hindrances out immediately, right now, out. This is actually a choiceful decision that we make. It's not what some teachers teach as choiceless awareness. Within the Mahasi method, this would fit in quite well in the sense that we have noted that the mind is in hindrance. And by doing so, we're actually coming out of it. Just like you were talking about earlier, that we kind of come outside of ourselves. That when we're in the hindrances, when we're in, let us say, the normal state of mind, when we're in bad feelings, then we are the bad feeling. We make statements like, I feel bummed out, I feel bad, I am angry. These are the kinds of things that we say that identify with us in the sense that we're in that old personality and that we're making the mistake thinking that that personality with all those habits is me.
So does that mean if you have a lot of sati during like when you're sitting and you your mind is producing these hindrances like a thought of me sitting, how it picturizes me as sitting, right? It produces those images, then it produces a thought or something. But as long as you aren't identifying, like if you identify with it, it feels like it's sticking with you. You don't even know that it's happening, right? But if you can see it happening at a distance and you aren't sticking with it and you're just watching as a watcher, then it's not considered a hindrance. Is that so?
Well, that's the waking up to the hindrances. Okay. Now, there was within all of Buddhism, including the Buddhist religion and the noble Buddhist group, there is an important time in the life of the Buddha that happened when he was approximately 35 or 36 years old, when he was sitting under the Bodhi tree. The story goes is that he was he had been practicing austerities and fasting to the point that he was nearly dead, and he fell into a creek. And then he struggled to get out of the creek, and as he was getting out of the creek, the thought occurred to him, how can I become enlightened, or how can I become free from suffering if I can't even get out of a creek? And so he recognized that whatever he was doing was not conducive to what he needed to be doing. So he started eating food and getting fat, and his teammates left him because he wasn't practicing the austerities, and he had been the very best at it. During that time, he also came to the conclusion, and the story is there about the rose apple tree, that while sitting under the rose apple tree when he was still living with his father, the Sakyan was doing a plowing ceremony. And he sat there and was going into first jhana, and he recollected that. Now, that's an interesting part of the story. If he, in fact, had been doing all of the high jhana work with Rama Ramaputta and Ali Kalama, why then did he have to reflect about it being the first jhana in his teenage years? The answer is because he hadn't been sitting in first jhana. He had gone making the same mistake that everybody makes, and that is that 2 has got to be better than 1. And 3 has got to be better than 2. And 4, oh my goodness, now we're getting someplace, Okay, so this is the point. But then he recognized that no, it is in fact the faculties of the first jhana that are needed to be brought together. And so with that, he sat down and he began to put together his whole system of thought that had to do with what we're here for is to eliminate suffering. Dukkha, dukkha, nirodha. He comes up with the Four Noble Truths. He comes up with changes to the practice, making it more breath-oriented, changing it, in fact, from the kasina meditations, which are outside objects, mud disk, the sky, a fire, all kinds of outside external objects of meditation, to bring it inside, to start having the mind and the body and the feelings as your objects of meditation. If I use the word meditation, sorry about that. So that change then there was an important point in there that came with the phrase that is now quite famous, and that is, aha, I see you, Mara, or I know you, Mara. This is, in fact, him putting together the whole process of Paticca Samuppada, but this is a key point. And that's exactly what the students are doing, but I would like to make sure that you understand that what you're doing is that at that point of sati, when the mind wakes up to what's going on, the first thing that happens then in correct practice is to take on the right effort of, aha, I see that I have been in hindrance. Aha, I see Mara. But in that regard, then now we're pulling out. We are not that hindrance. We are not that personality. We are not that Mara. Aha, I see you, Mara, means that now we're pulling out. That happens instantly. Doesn't take any time at all. It happens right in this very moment. When we wake up, we can say, aha. For the very beginning student, it would be, aha, I see that the mind has wandered away from the breath. Aha, I see that the mind has wandered away from the breath. Eventually and very quickly becomes, aha, I see you, Mara. I see that what I was thinking had taken me off of the breath. So this is the thing that we begin to wake up to. So if you're actually watching and following the breath and all of this noise is in the background or it's still there, now we have to say, aha, I see that too. I see that stuff. And if I can see it, then I can pull out of it, and I am no longer in that. And so now we're taking the right effort to come out of that. Now, this right effort has, in fact, 2 different kinds of components. One is the right effort of taking a deep breath. But Anapanasati is not about watching a shallow or ordinary breath. And many students and some teachers teach to don't try to control the breath. Well, if you're not controlling the breath, then the mind is not really very fixed to it, and it'll easily wander away. But if you're actually controlling the breath, intentionally taking long, deep breath, then that's the practice of Anapanasati. It says so right there in the sutta. The very first item is understanding that when the breath is coming in and long, that it's a long in breath, and understanding that on the out breath, it's a long out breath. Well, now that understanding of the in and the out breath only takes a fraction of a second. But the breath itself, depending upon the practice, can be 8, 10, 12, 20 seconds. because the breathing is going to get long in the sense not just with deep breath, but it's going to be long in the sense of time. That ordinary people will breathe at about 20 breaths a minute. That means that within 3 seconds, they've done an in and an out breath. But if you start doing it like counting up to the number 8 on the in breath, or taking about 8 seconds for an in breath and then 8 seconds for an out breath, now we're at 16 seconds. And that's down around 4 breaths a minute. But if we add another count of 4 after the out breath, now we're up to a count of 20, which means now the breathing is down to about 3 breaths a minute, but it's still a long, deep, comfortable breath. And that we're wanting to make sure that the body is well regulated, well energized, well woken up. That the neuroscientists are beginning to figure this out also, that meditation is not about concentrating, closing down, focusing on a tiny little thing, and basically shutting off much of the activities of the mind. That basically what we're doing instead is getting the air going, taking a deep breath, oxygenating the body, getting the frontal cortex, that part of the brain that's only human, getting it active. Because most of our personality comes out of our old deep past, and some of that goes all the way back into our DNA in the sense of instincts. And most people live their lives instinctually rather than through wisdom. Well, if we're going to live our lives through wisdom, we've got to have that wisdom machine pumping. And so we want to take really deep breath. That's the way that we talk about right effort, is the effort that it takes to start breathing. But the other part of the right effort is to gladden the mind. Actually, step 10 of Anapanasati is talking about gladdening the mind. Well, you say, well, first you talk about step 1, and now you're talking about step 10. Well, don't think about them as steps like an army marching. Think much more about it as like a dance, where you're jumping all over the place. Okay, that we have to take the order out of it and put it into a more natural order. And so the first thing that happens is the wake up, the sati, and that's based upon right view. In other words, if you thought that, well, meditation is of no value to anybody, I don't know why anybody would do it, then that would be a wrong view that would prevent you from actually getting any benefit out of it. But now that you're having the right view that this is worthwhile doing, now sati can be practiced and developed over and over and over again to wake up and to gladden the mind. And that first kind of gladdening the mind would be, aha, I see you, Mara. Aha, I see you, hindrance. I am not that hindrance anymore. When I was in the hindrance, I was the hindrance. When I was in the Mara, I was the Mara. But aha, now I see you, Mara, which means that separation, that breakout. That's an important point, because in fact, you are not the hindrances. And that we can, in fact, decide or choose what kind of thoughts that we're going to have. That we do not have to have hindering thoughts. We can have wholesome thoughts that are useful and valuable instead of having thoughts that are unwholesome and unvaluable. And when do we do that? Whenever we remember. Whenever we remember. That's the whole point, is to wake up, look at what we're doing, and make a change. And the change is, aha, I see you, Mara, accompanied with a deep breath. And this actually, that I see you, Mara, now is our separation or our coming out of the hindrance. Coming out of the hindrance now means that we're becoming secluded from the hindrance. In fact, the whole reason that we spend time in seclusion is because if we try to practice all the time out in the world, then the world itself is going to be a hindrance as well as what's in the mind. So we get off into seclusion so that we can get away from the world and only deal with the hindrances in the mind, but then immediately we remove the hindrances from the mind also. When do we do that? As soon as we remember to. And so we take the hindrances out of the mind with that thought, aha, I see you. Aha, I see you, Mara. That should then start to bring on satisfaction, a feeling of well-being, that I am not that hindrance, I am not that thought. It also has the quality of bringing on a sense of success, that we've actually been able to remember it. And so now we're adding the next element of the Eightfold Noble Path, and that is one's right attitude. The attitude of being a winner, the attitude of being capable of doing this. Remember, I was talking about that quality of doubt. Can I do this? The answer right now is yes, I can. I just did. And if I do it this time, I can do it again. And so we begin to develop the confidence that we can, in fact, come out of the hindrances and live our lives the way that we want to live it, rather than living it in the way that it has been the habit of doing it. So these four things of right view, right sati, right effort, and right attitude is that which we're developing, and we're using anapanasati to develop those skills. Now, the word piti is often a difficult word for people to understand, but the easy way to understand it is that that's the feeling of success. That's the feeling of, I can do that. So that the student then eventually gets to the point that he says, it doesn't matter how obstructed the mind is, it doesn't matter what's going on, I can still throw that stuff out of the mind and feel good in this present moment. An example of that at the really, really far end is, how are you going to feel? How would you choose to feel while you're getting arrested and taken to the police station?
Tense.
Most people choose to feel really bad because they're in the habit of feeling bad when things like that happen. But in fact, you could make good friends with the cops. You can enjoy the thing. But that takes some mental strength, you see. Well, this is exactly what we're doing. We're developing the strength that we need, that skill of sati, to remember that you can feel the way that you want to feel. You do not have to feel the way that you're in the habit of feeling. And so this is when we begin to get success, when we can say, you know something? I don't care what a bad situation it is that I've gotten myself into, or thoughts, I can come out of it. And I can feel good about it, even when we're sick, even when we're dying. We can choose how we're going to feel if we can remember to choose how we feel, and we have developed the skills of feeling the way that we want to feel. So this is basically the whole practice then, in a nutshell. From the beginning to the end, it all happens in this present moment. Do you choose to feel good right now, or do you choose to let the old system run?
Yeah.
You are not that old system. You are not who you thought you were. You are something yet defined. In fact, when you do get it defined, it'll probably change after that, and the definition will be wrong again. Anicca vata sankhara. Everything is in a set of flux and change, and who you are is dependent upon other things, which means really that you're anicca also, that there is no real soul. So in that phrase of going back to the dark night of the soul, there's no soul. That the dark night might be there, but hey, pop out of it. That's your choice. You're in the dark night of the soul partly because you expect some help from someplace and it's not coming. But when you say, wait a minute, I can give myself my own help. Yeah, the night be dark, but I can turn a light on.
So I think like my sati, because of these past experiences, is actually far better than what it used to be. And I think that's one of my, calling it a strong point is a weird thing, but yeah, it's one of the good things in my sits where I know like all of this Mara that's happening in the present moment without coming back to it. Like it never even leaves the present moment. But I don't know why, but putting the effort in sort of feels weird. Like if I need to try and put an intention of, hey, come back or focus on the breath, let everything be, or focus on smiling or something, that sort of feels like it causes tension. My mind just wants to be an observer instead of engaging and trying to do something about what's happening.
Right. But you can also understand that that's the hindrance is talking because they don't want to put out the right effort. They want to leave things the way that they were and make life really easy. So in the beginning of one's practice, right effort is a key ingredient. Most people don't work hard enough, or they work too hard, but putting in just the right amount of effort. So in this regard, what is just the right amount of effort? The least amount of effort to get the job done is the right effort. Now, most people put in too much effort, and that's when you're getting a little bit of tension or anxieties or any of that kind of stuff comes up. It's because you're wanting something out of the meditation. What we're inviting you to do is to get that out of the meditation right now. All you have to do is enjoy it. It's not that much work.
Is it a feeling of uh, almost like watching something happening and then slightly engaging with it like once in a few seconds, but not like constantly doing something? Almost like
not working at it right. Exactly. This is like not work. This is pleasure. You've been working your whole life. That's your personality, is to work.
Yeah. So you aren't applying that effort constantly. It's almost like you shape what's happening slightly and then leave it and then watch what's happening.
Then going back to that point, aha, I see you.
Yeah.
Because aha, I see you is that right effort. The right effort to acknowledge that you have seen those hindrances and that you're coming out of them.
And do you?
And it becomes joyful. It becomes satisfying. In fact, this is the key word to start working on: is the skill of satisfaction. In the Pali, the word is sukha. Well, sukha actually, both in the Thai language and in the Pali, are direct opposites. When there is sukha, there is not dukkha. When there is dukkha, there is not sukha. So if you can get yourself into a state of sukha or into a state of satisfaction, then that's the state that you wanted to be in the first place. And we can practice that immediately, as opposed to being in hindrance, which is preventing us from being in a state of satisfaction. Now, I'll add a couple of other words with that. One of the words that to add to that is security or safety. Because normally our personality coming out of the instincts has qualities of fear. In fact, anxiety is a kind of fear. Wanting things and doing without them when we think that we need them is actually a form of danger. And so we begin to feel bad because we want something, thinking that we'll feel better when we get it. But no, all we're doing is continuing to develop the feeling of wanting. So even when people get fulfilled, they still want more and more and more and more. Because the things that they're wanting are not really satisfying. But we're going to actually start to practice being satisfied. Going back to that issue about playing the piano, that if you're not practicing the piano, you're not going to learn to play the piano. How can you become satisfied if you're not practicing satisfaction? So it has to be practiced. Right effort needs to come into it. And when you say, oh, why bother? Or this sounds like too much work, then those are just the old hindrances that is preventing you from getting the good value. And you can say to those thoughts, never mind, you're just hindrances. Out you go. Okay. So one last thing then, and that is that in this regard, we're going to start to learn to control the mind and control what kind of thoughts that we have in it. The first thing is to wake up and to recognize that the mind is in fact out of control and doing what it normally does, like a dog barking out in the yard. And so the human wakes up and sees that the dog is out barking in the yard, but what he's barking at is not important. That this is a sort of a false alarm.
Yeah.
And so now we can just say to the dog, down boy, no problem, no problem. Okay. This is the way that we need to actually start to train our own mind. There's no problem. Down boy. All of these hindrances are based in fear of getting something that we want or trying to make things secure, where in fact there's really no danger. This stuff comes out of our ancient past when life on the planet Earth for humans was really dangerous. But in our society now, there's very, very little time that you're actually in physical danger. Most of the time, we're in an imaginary danger.
Yeah. Our mind keeps on making something. Yep.
And so, and every time that you can catch it doing that, you can say, hey, wait a minute, this is good. I'm really glad that I'm not thinking about that anymore. I'm really glad that I can take a rest, enjoy the moment, and start enjoying the moment over and over and over again. Just keep enjoying the moment. And when do you do that? Every time you remember it. Every time you remember to do that, sati, you take the effort to throw that stuff out and come to a state of satisfaction.
So the long breath that you mentioned, do you do that once you have this, once you remember that, I was getting lost in these thoughts, or do you do it consistently throughout your entire sit? Like, is it just when you come back, or is it throughout the sit you focus on long breaths?
That's a good question. The answer to that is that during the time that it takes to take a breath, the mind is really fast. And all that we're going to really need the breath for is to make sure that it's a long, deep breath. We know that it's the in breath. We can watch the body. And then we take the out breath, and we know that it's an out breath. Well, there's plenty of more time to do a lot of other stuff. For instance, becoming aware of the body, watching the body as it breathes, watching the movement of the chest and the shoulders and the abdomen, starting to wake up the body. In fact, Anapanasati is based upon the four foundations of mindfulness of the body, the feeling, the mind, and the mind's objects. And so in that regard, as an object of meditation, we're going to be taking all four of them, but we're going to be taking them one by one as they arise and occur, rather than in a particular formal order. But generally, if you're taking a long, deep breath, then the body is going to make some major changes. Your blood chemistry is going to change. All kinds of things are happening that are fairly easy to see and to understand. Generally, it's the feelings that are the most difficult to understand when they come up, but when they do, they will arise in the form of hindrances like anxiety or fear or anger or whatever like that. And this stuff is more than likely going to be happening throughout the day, not while you're on the cushion. So whatever we're doing on the cushion should at least be preliminary work to get ready for doing sati throughout the day, so that we can keep the mind out of the hindrances, especially of the heavy duty feelings. But that takes a little while. That takes later. In the beginning, we're going to start working with the body. We're going to wake up the body. We're going to do things that consciously bring us to focus on the body. A real good example of that is to start watching the hands, to start noticing the body movements throughout the day. But while we're sitting in meditation, we can also experience the body. We can feel the touch of the cloth if we're wearing a shirt. We can feel the motion of the air if we're bare-chested. But there's an awful lot of stuff, very subtle things that are going on all around us that we're never hardly ever paying any attention to, because all of the mental energy is stuck in the hindrances of the mind. So now that we're bringing it to this present moment, there's a huge amount of stuff that's happening in the present moment through our senses. And one of the senses we don't pay much attention to is the body's senses of the tactile and the proprioceptic. Now, proprioceptic means that you know the position of the body without having to open your eyes and check it. For instance, you know, now that I'm mentioning it, that you have your left hand curled in a way that you're resting it on your chin. You don't have to look down to see that. You know that that's there. That's the proprioceptic. That needs to be woken up. This is how we work with the four postures, of becoming aware of what the body is doing, what the postures of the body, as well as all of the tactile sensations. This is, in fact, exactly what Mahasi is talking about when he says rising, falling, touching, sitting. The rising is the in-breath, the falling is the out-breath, the touching is the tactile sensation, and the sitting is the proprioceptic, of knowing the postures of the body, to know if the neck is tilted or if it's straight, to know if the back is straight, that you can feel that. You don't have to open your eyes and look in a mirror to see that stuff. You can feel it directly. So this is what we're meaning by waking the body up.
So is that the third step, the one where in Anapanasati it says, I'm aware of the bodily formations, right? It's that anywhere in the body. It's not like the tip of the nose or something. It's
everywhere, exactly. And that's actually step 3 of Anapanasati, if we talk about it in steps. It's just the third item on the list, but it's also there because it's a function of the body, feelings, mind objects. This actually comes from the old tradition in ancient times of the 4 elements of earth, fire, water, and air. And you can see the body is the earth, the feelings are the water, the mind is fire, and the contents of the mind, like clouds, are the air. And so this is the way that this Satipatthana came. But now we're not talking about it on the outside elements, we're talking about the inside elements. And so we want to start paying more attention to the body. We want to start paying more attention to what the mind is doing. And so this is the process of, and so we're putting them together to remember to watch the breath, but also we're beginning also to work with the feelings, in the sense of, let's start feeling the way we want to feel instead of feeling the way that we have normally been feeling. So instead of wanting something from out of meditation, we just simply enjoy it.
So is most of the effort, if I'm getting it correctly, is at least the beginning of the sits, most of the effort is to get rid of the unwholesome and then let the attention move wherever in the body or in one of the tactile sensations. But you aren't trying to move the attention specifically to a point in the body, right? That's not what you're doing. You just let it move in general wherever it wants to, so that it knows that it's breathing or not. but you aren't specifically focusing your attention on just the chest or just the nose or anything like that. Is that correct?
Exactly so. That would be the Western mind, or the ordinary mind of wanting more and more and more and more by focusing down closer and closer and closer. What we're doing is we're opening, not closing.
Yeah, get rid of the hindrance and then let the mind move wherever in the body it wants to move. Like let it do its thing.
Okay? Yes. And I'll leave this last point then about wholesome versus unwholesome. And that is that we can consider hindrances unwholesome. They keep us out of the present moment. So any kind of thought that's going to pull you out of the present moment then would be a new hindrance arising or an unwholesome thought. And so once we get ourselves into a state of satisfaction, which can be done with a breath or two, we can now be on guard to only allow wholesome thoughts in. And the easy way for me to describe it now, and later we'll go into it in greater detail, is we're going to draw a boundary in the mind. We're going to stay, instead of the mind can go anywhere that it wanted to, now we're going to set a line or draw a fence or something like that between what we'd call the wholesome and the unwholesome. You can think about it as drawing a boundary between the forest and the desert, so that we're going to keep the mind in the forest and keep it out of the desert.
Yeah, but you don't focus it which tree it needs to focus on in the forest. You just let it move anywhere, because otherwise that's too much effort, right?
Except that we're going to let it go where it wants to go, but we're going to watch it. We're going to guard it.
Yep.
We're going to make sure that it only stays in the wholesome and doesn't wander into the unwholesome.
I get it now.
Eventually, we're going to start bringing the mind down to smaller and smaller things, so that we can actually get it all the way down to a mantra, so that the only thought we've got is the thought that comes with the in-breath and the thought that comes with the out-breath. In Thailand, they do Budo. So Bu on the in-breath and Do on the out-breath. But almost everyone who practices that too early will say, yeah, but the mind is all over the place while I'm saying Bu and while I'm saying Do. All right, so here's how we're going to work with that, is by beginning in the beginning to make a decision that we're going to guard the mind to only allow wholesome thoughts in and not allow unwholesome. And here's how we do that. Wholesome thoughts would be about this present moment. Wholesome thoughts would be about success. Wholesome thoughts would be about happiness. Wholesome thoughts would be about satisfaction and security. And unwholesome thoughts would be the kind of thoughts that are going to pull us out of this state. Thoughts of yesterday, thoughts of tomorrow, thoughts of doubt, thoughts of worry, thoughts of a restless mind is going to take us out of that state of satisfaction. And it will. And your job is twofold. One is to try to prevent that from happening, but if it does happen, to remember to come back out of it and start again. Never mind, start again. Over and over and over again to find the mind in hindrance. I see you, Mara. Start again. And so it's going to take a while. And don't expect much of anything else, especially anything spectacular, because wanting something big or spectacular to happen is just another form of desire. And it brings tension, wanting things. What we're actually practicing is to be satisfied with the way things are, because we don't practice that. Nobody practices being satisfied. Everybody that I know practices to get something, instead of recognizing you've already got everything you need. Everything is already here. Just enjoy it.
But just one last point. I see that once my mind starts to gladden up and the hindrances go away, and it automatically happens, my eyes light up, everything sort of, the breath becomes really soft and shallow, and the mind starts gladdening up, and it sort of powers up, right? It sort of becomes like the eyes really light up sometimes, and I feel very ecstatic almost. But at that point, my breaths are really short and shallow, almost like I just ran like 5 kilometers to get to my house. What do I do in that scenario? Like, how do I still try to get my breaths to be long, or do I let it be and just enjoy the moment?
Well, part of the really enjoyment of the moment is that taking that deep, long breath. This really is nice. Okay. So keep the breath going in that way, or to remember, even if you're in a state of satisfaction, to not let the breathing go shallow again. Because if the breathing goes shallow again and we're not watching it, that means that we're inviting the hindrances to come back.
But if you are getting, and that emotion does feel like excitement, like it first starts with just gladdening, but later it starts becoming just excitement with a little bit of happiness probably, but it's mostly excitement at that.
Well, actually, without going into great detail about it right now, we'll continue with this later.
Yeah.
Excitement is a hindrance. So when you feel excited and you know you're feeling excited, that's the time to take a deep, long breath and say, I don't have to feel excited. I can feel contented instead. That a lot of people do get excited when they're meditating in the sense of anticipation, or things are about to get really good. But we want to be beyond that. We want to be not caught in the anticipation of something good, but get over the anticipation and just enjoy it.
So yeah, just deep, long breaths throughout the sitting.
As best you can. Don't give yourself a hassle about not doing it very well, because you've spent your whole life not doing it at all. This is a new skill that you're developing. So give yourself congratulations instead that you're doing it right, that this is good, that you're gaining confidence that you can continue to do this. This is the way to do it, rather than getting really excited that something wonderful is about to happen. But nothing is wonderful is about to happen.
Makes sense.
Anything that was wonderful has already just immediately happened and will happen again in the next instant. Your job is to enjoy the wonder rather than anticipate it happening. Now, this skill that's to be developed, this skill of satisfaction, in the beginning, all it is just, okay, I'm satisfied. But it begins to grow. That the satisfaction too is a skill to be developed. It says that right there in the Anapanasati. Train yourself into sukha. Train yourself into piti. In that regard, train yourself to feel like a winner. To train yourself into right attitude. That's the way of training. Okay, and those are actually almost all of the jhana factors. We'll talk about a few more of the jhana factors later, but these three are the main thing. And in fact, the deep breathing helps the others to get the mind focused and clear, so that you can really pay attention to see what's going on.
Yeah, I think it'll make the mind stick to the breath as well, because like it'll probably feel more satisfying.
Rather than sticking to the breath, that's the way that the Westerners would say it. I would say continuing to return to the breath. On every out breath, you're going to return to that out breath, but you're not going to stay on the out breath while you're out breathing. You're just going to return to it. Note it well that, in fact, you are breathing a deep out breath, and then you begin to go back to the in breath, then you'll note it that this is a deep breath, this is an in breath, and now the mind is free to do a lot of other stuff. But every in breath and every out breath, a little bit of sati. I remember to take a deep breath. I remember to take an out breath, a deep out breath.
Got it. And in between that, then it can move inside the body, discover the tactile sensations that are happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Or the mind will come up with hindrances. Aha, I see you.
Yeah.
And to throw them out. Or a feeling will come up. Or a bad sensation will come up.
Or
and
just pleasantness. If I start feeling pleasant or gladdened, I still sense that, right? I don't stop my mind from moving towards gladdening.
Yes, you just enjoy it. That's the whole point, is bring yourself into a state of pleasure.
Yeah.
And enjoy that pleasure. And keep that pleasure by pushing out anything that's going to rob you of that pleasure, the hindrances.
Yep. True.
Okay. Well, let's finish this now, and we'll continue on later. When are you going to call again?
Within a few days, probably.
Right.
I'll go and try this today, and if it really works out, I'll call you in a few days again to ask the next few steps.
Okay. Well, good luck. I hope that you find the success that that you're going to be practicing. And we'll see you in a couple of days.
Yep. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
All right, Rare. We'll see you.
Bye. Take care.